Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Kristen. I'm the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, people know that you've been moving around London to Jamaica, back to Sweden. I've stayed here in London, and last night I did a very British thing. I went to the theater, and my wife and I and a few friends, we went and saw Shakespeare, but there was a bit of a twist, Nick.
Oh, what is the twist with Shakespeare? I thought with Shakespeare there is no twist.
Well, this particular production does. The name of the production company is called Shitface Shakespeare, in which one of the key members of the acting group, they get fairly drunk before the show. They continue to drink during the show with help from the audience. And basically everyone else just kind of has to improv around someone who's forgetting their lines, perhaps stumbling a little bit, maybe going a little off piste, perhaps being a little inappropriate with their language. It's actually the second time I've seen the show. The first time I saw it, it was over Christmas, so it wasn't Shakespeare. It was Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, but it was a Pistmas Carol. So last night was Hamlet. So to be not to be, it wasn't Hamlet who was the inebriated character. It was Ophelia, the love interest. But yeah, if anyone's ever in London, it's £20 for a ticket, so it's not even expensive when you start thinking about theater ticket prices in London. But very fun comedy show with a nice little twist.
Is the prerequisite that the whole crowd is also pissed as well, or is that just you're only there for viewing pleasure?
I mean, there were a few drinks in the crowd as well, so I only had a few.
Cool concept. Cool concept.
Yeah, no, it was very fun. Like I said, it's right in Leicester Square, which is nice because, like, I tell people all the time, even though I live in London, my wife and I don't really go to central London that frequently. Like, we're not going to Soho. We're not going to Leicester Square, Piccadilly Circus, stuff like that. Like, it's not really where we go. But it was nice to go there. And, like, you come out of the show at about 10:30, and, like, you hear some places about tourism's down and stuff like that. City was a buzz last night, and, it was Thursday night. But, yeah, it was a good show. The city was lively in the middle of the summer. But, yeah, it's just, if you're ever in London and you want to go to the theater, maybe do something with a little bit of a twist, Shitface Shakespeare, highly recommended.
Love it. I'm going to see if there's anything like that over this part in this neck of the woods. But I have never seen anything quite that interpretation. I think that's the type of theater that I would enjoy a lot more than any of that very traditional, proper old school plays. That stuff is just a little bit lost on me. But hey, I was educated in Australia, so take that how you will.
Well, the thing is I've never actually read Hamlet. I know some of the main characters, obviously, like I said, the famous to be or not to be's, from there, but I don't actually know the story. So
do you know it now?
No, because it's like, it was just like, the characters just so all over the place. So, like, someone sat next to me, he's like, "Oh, what's happening?" I was like, "I literally don't have a clue. Like, I'm just laughing along because it's funny, but, like, I've got no clue what's going on." So I might still need to go, maybe go to ChatGPT and, like, can you just summarize the key summaries? Because it was a little all over the place.
Yeah, that whole old school, old English language thing must be incredibly difficult firstly for anyone, let alone someone who's not been exposed to it before, or let alone someone who English is their second language or what have you, to try and get their heads around what's going on in those types of shows is something else. So yeah, I'll add that to my list of things to do next time I'm in London. It sounds great.
Make it happen. Maybe not kid friendly, but you and the wife can have a night out, drop the kids off somewhere else, but definitely well worth it. So, Nick, one of the things we're going to focus today's episode on, we talk about in the office, content never sleeps. You and I have been on holiday, but that did not stop you from dropping some absolute bombs on LinkedIn in terms of some posts. I think you were telling me something 100,000 views across a couple of different posts that you had. It never stops you. But one of the things that came up, two of your posts were around YouTube. And we had spoken the last time you and I had a recording when you were out at another event in Sweden, getting to talk to Roger Mitchell. He was talking about the growth of YouTube, and I think it got your wheels spinning a little bit. And we in the industry have talked, quite highly and with a lot of excitement around what YouTube can potentially do. But there's still a lot of questions, things that are unproven as to, will this model work when we think about sort of the traditional model that has just sort of been a repeatable process to print money, basically, that we don't know if it's going to work. And while there is a bunch of excitement, there's still questions, layers, things we need to peel back in terms of who the strategy is right for, even if you do what is the right strategy. And those posts you had on LinkedIn, which I would say go check them out if you want to see, because I think they're averaging about 30 comments a piece from very smart people that are, throwing their thoughts in there. But, Nick, we're going to talk about this over the next sort of 45 minutes, just the nuance within YouTube, and just whether that's tempering expectations, whether we need to turn up expectations, and how we need to approach it. So I guess, a bit of an open floor for us to go where we want with this, but there's a
Yeah.
lot to discuss about YouTube.
Yeah, there is. And I think there's an important discussion to have. And also, one thing to note is at our media summit we're running in Madrid in November, it's the first time we're really going deep on the subject matter. We've got some of the most interesting case studies around YouTube that are going to be presented at that event. That's really exciting. We're having a dedicated forum just on YouTube there, hours and hours of content just on maximizing the value of the platform. So yeah, it's a really hot topic. And the reason we're doing it, everyone is talking about it for different reasons. Now, everyone's talking about it. And I think this is the bit that I always like to be a counterbalance, whether it's in the office or whether it's in what's being commentated about, is either try to be ahead of the conversation or counterbalance the conversation. And what I mean by that is there is a lot of momentum and inertia now about like, okay, whether it's in sports or outside of sports, YouTube's growing. At an insane rate. I think it's number 2 in consumption now in the UK. I think it's number 1 in the US in terms of overall consumption against other entertainment platforms. And so basically, and some people are saying, basically just give up and go to YouTube and don't do anything else. That's where the future is. That's where everything's going. Now, and there possibly is a lot of validity to that for various reasons, but it does come with a lot of challenges. In the same way we talked about OTT probably a few years ago, a lot of people were excited about that you have to go direct, build your own audience, build that direct relationship, monetize more effectively, blah, 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 blah. And now we've come back to a point where like, actually a blended approach is much more important. So are we back to another stage where actually YouTube, rather than blended, actually YouTube is the whole and soul destination that we need to be pointing towards as an industry? Or do we have to continue with that blended and more dynamic approach? And that's the conversation that I'm trying to, I guess, not keep balance. Yeah, probably keep balance with how others are talking about it. At the moment, it feels like there's a lot of inertia through different channels about how important, how valuable YouTube is, which I believe to be the case. But there comes a lot of asterisks next to that around the now and also around the future.
Well, I think one of the other interesting things is just saying the frame. You talk about how popular it is a consumption platform. I think the other thing is also how it's being consumed in terms of some of the statistics I've seen come out about the amount of people watching on connected TVs and, smart devices. I think historically we've thought of YouTube being a website, therefore it's very much on desktops, or it's on, YouTube is, iPads or phones and things like that. But actually there's a lot of statistics to say it's not a small screen activity. It's a big screen activity, which I think is probably telling towards maybe the inertia that it is headed, is that like where it's actually being consumed at is it's no longer, we used to always talk about the big screen experience when it comes to sports. And if more YouTube stuff is being consumed on the big screen, maybe that also changes the way, or there's a greater acceptance as to what it could be as a larger platform. Using the word larger in multiple different meanings, that might be like a triple entendre. But yeah, I find that to be a really interesting statistic about just how people are consuming it as well.
Yeah, it seems like it's taking over the big screen, or the bigger screen, the smart TVs, basically as a viewing pleasure, a viewing experience. I remember talking to Ralph Rivera, who was at the time the MD of the NBA for the EMEA region, who's been in broadcasting and in the industry for decades, digital media and gaming. And he just calls it the biggest screen available is what the focus needs to be. And I think that's such a simple, succinct way of putting it. It's all about what experience you can deliver on the biggest screen available to the person at the time when they want to watch something. And that's where the smart TV experience is so important. And YouTube has obviously nailed that ability to serve content that keeps people on platform better than anyone. So look, I what I try to do is, with some of the stuff I write, people ask me, do I like really think about it and I plan out stuff? No, I normally just wake up and go, actually, you know what? I'm going to write something about this off the cuff. The one that I wrote about was really, I did a bit of a brain dump. I was like, okay, what is the situation and where I would consider going all in on YouTube as your primary platform, and when wouldn't I? So there's some things basically I just listed down that I thought would be a consideration, and that therefore did span quite a lot of feedback from people in the industry, a lot of agreement, but a lot of clarity, also a lot more context. which I thought was really valuable. So I don't know if we should run through some of those, Chris, or what do you think that would be the best way to approach that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's go through why you would want to go and use YouTube as your main platform. So I think maybe some context here, maybe Nick, not putting words in your mouth, is like, if you're a smaller organization, or maybe should you go and build your own D2C platform, owned and operated, or should you just bypass that completely, go to YouTube is basically what we're framing this as, correct?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So when should YouTube be your lead platform? And ultimately, I'd say it's if you're targeting global and digital first fans, especially Gen Z millennials. Now, what's important about it is the global aspect of that as well as digital first, because global, there's some sports properties that are hyper targeted to maybe local clubs, local regions, etc. Is YouTube the best platform there? Probably less so than something that is trying to reach a multitude of different channels and audiences and has real global appeal. YouTube instantly enables some of that. The next one is you're a second tier or niche sport where traditional broadcasters just aren't investing, which is obviously something we're seeing more and more of these days, and having to find alternative routes to market. Why not go to YouTube and build your business case to take to media organizations in the future, or just build your own business there if you think you can scale an audience of some significance. See, you're ready to act like a modern day media brand, a serious modern day media brand, not just a conventional here's my live rights, here's my highlights, job done. We're going to talk about it a bit later, possibly, but what's the secret sauce of a lot of the rights owners on YouTube? It's not the sports content that's really making getting the momentum there. So being able to produce content consistently, building community on those platforms, so the type of two-way engagement you need on those sorts of platforms, prioritizing the storytelling and the non-live aspects of your sports, which will help for ultimately discovery on the platform as well. And the next one, you're exploring a wider flywheel of direct monetization. So you're looking at memberships, merchandise sales, live streams, advertising, ticketing, etc. You're looking for all these different ways to generate revenue, not just the one media rights ticket as your main revenue driver alone. The next one is you're really wanting to tap into the creator economy, and that could be through partnerships with YouTubers. It could be athletes themselves as part of the stakeholders. It could be just influencers in and around your sport, and also not within your sport, but tapping into that group of audiences if you really believe that is a great way of scaling audience fast. And particularly if you think about what we see with a lot of sports that come to market these days, these new disruptor leagues, they always have either athletes or creators attached to the investment rounds, right? So those are the types of sports that are clearly looking towards this. And finally, that you're really looking to drive value beyond just ad revenue alone, because YouTube is still not a proven source of revenue directly through YouTube's channels alone. They are an enabler and they generate some income. But if you talk to most people who manage YouTube channels and products in market, the monetization relative to the audience scale is pretty weak still. But if you're able to do content sponsorships, maybe data, basically sponsorships around digital, sponsorships around the content itself. So sponsoring the shows you're creating, that's where you can get, or you're looking to build a greater picture of the type of audience that you have connected with your sport, to then help either sell into broadcasters or to sponsors. Just having that extra layer of value coming out of the content outside of just pure direct ad revenue has to be part of the approach if you want to make YouTube your lead platform.
Now, we'll talk about this. Nuance is going to be a part of all this. I don't think we're saying any of these are a steady, hard, fast rule, but I think one of the things we've talked about is sometimes you might be a tier 1 in your domestic market, but you might be a tier 2 product in other markets, and just blending that strategy together where maybe, you want to go with a large domestic broadcaster in your home market, but you need to think about elsewhere where you're not going to get those media rights deals, where you're probably going to have a blended strategy where, to your point, maybe internationally is when you start bringing in content creators to build your message in the local markets where there's an affinity for them. This isn't very few occasions where we're going to talk about are any of these strategies, whether it's YouTube, subscription, whatever, is going to be a hard, fast model globally. But I think to your point, it's just worth mentioning, like, there is that nuance to that where, like, it's not one way or another. In some cases, you might have to be doing multiples of these strategies depending on the markets that you're actually trying to go into.
Completely. And I think actually looking towards the creator world again, you can get a sense of what you need to be doing to maximize the value. Look at some of the biggest creators in the world, your Logan Pauls, you might even look at the golf creator economy and how they sell themselves on platform. I watched a bit of content recently. We talked about Grant Horvath the other day, and I actually watched some of his content. He did a 2-on-2 with Phil Mickelson against Bryson DeChambeau and the GM golf guy. I can't remember what his name is. But basically, they had loads of product placement through it. They were selling. So Phil Mickelson, the reason he's on it by the looks of it is the exposure is great, but he's actually selling. He's like an owner of these recovery munchies or something they're called. I'm not even sure what it was. But they're driving in the golf cart. They do a big sales pitch on how great this product is. The same with Logan Paul and the Prime drinks. And they need that. They're adding, and Mr. Beast and the various things that they've launched, festivals or whatever they're called. And some of them are gimmicky as heck. But what has the results shown? That actually loads of people buy that stuff because they're being backed by people they follow and support, and therefore, the idea of sponsorship, that's a great example of how it can work really well if you've got a product and you can create some brand alignment there. But if sports can add those consumer aspects to it more and bring it more front and center alongside some of these athletes talking about it, but maybe there's a legitimate revenue stream to be made out of that, not just using the e-commerce tools that exist online, but the actual just marketing of commerce products and merchandise and other things in their channels as well is something that has to be really considered.
Well, we're going to come back and speak about golf specifically, PGA Tour being one of the examples that we want to look into their particular strategy. But those are some of the positives of when you should be prioritizing or considering putting YouTube on a higher pedestal, if we want to put it that way. But if we flip it on the other end, when you maybe should not be putting YouTube at the top of your media strategy, what are some of the conditions you would say flip this narrative a little bit?
Sure. So here's the few that I listed out before. One is you actually own your premium live rights. So those are still effectively monetized, way more effectively, selling them on traditional broadcasters or even own through your own digital direct-to-consumer platform. So generally, if they're premium enough, stick your live rights somewhere else would be my suggestion for now. But the beauty of YouTube is you can do non-exclusive and have it on both if you want. The nuance comes into play, or you can flip a switch down the line whenever you think you're ready. You've got a captive enough audience on there if you want to. But if you own premium live rights is one. You're a sport that is built for advertising in integration. So basically, think of the NFL as the most easiest example. It's built for high quality ad slots throughout its sporting experience. You can't maximize the revenues on that advertising space in the same way through YouTube as you would ever through traditional broadcasters. So you're going to be always more appealing to a linear broadcaster who's selling advertising than YouTube can ever generate for revenue. The example that I actually shared was that Fox came out and said they were achieving around $40 to $60 for CPMs on the FIFA Women's World Cup. But typical sports content for YouTube is in the single digits, somewhere between like $2 to maybe $10 at best. So think about the gap there. You're talking 4 to 10, 15 times, depending on who you are and what markets you're in. So that's why still the monetization, optimization of advertising sales is through traditional media still, but it could change. Your fan base still leans heavily towards linear viewing. So there's lots of sports that have a legacy there. Don't walk away from them now. Like, keep serving them if that's where your roots are, and just find out ways of perhaps carving out parts of your rights. Could be going on YouTube or other places. And also when there's a really strong local TV consumption component to it. Again, think about in the US with RSNs, perhaps where we should get to in certain football leagues across Europe with really serving localized sporting content to your key markets, and most likely you probably skew older as a demographic than some of those other sports. Another one is you don't really have the team internally to produce enough to build a real subscriber base and audience on the platform, let alone monetize it. What we've seen, and we've talked about it quite a bit, is actually a number of the major sports properties have wound back some of their capabilities on content creation, NFL selling off the NFL network as an example with ESPN. It isn't all bells and whistles just to do more and more and add more resource internally. It comes with a lot of burden that you have to like turn that into some sort of return. And the other thing is you're not really ultimately in a position to invest long-term in content strategy. And let's face it, I hear that a lot. Like most sports want instant results from the content they output. They need to because of the different stakeholders wanting success immediately. They're not up for building a longer term plan over a couple of years of building a massive subscriber base or really investing into content output for non-live. Really only the top players have that capacity to do so. So those things I think are really why someone just shouldn't be looking at YouTube yet as a primary platform. It's a platform you have to have visibility on. It can be where you can funnel certain pieces of content and maybe create some bespoke. But the idea of going all in on it really shouldn't be for those people that I just went through.
Yeah, and you talk about the lack of production resources, I think, as well. Just people always underestimate things like customer service and marketing and things like that. Maybe YouTube helps a little bit on that front, but it's just I think people we'll use him again for the 100th time. The former CEO Crystal Palace that always talks about, the Premier League should just whip up a OTT platform, sell for £100, make $10 billion or whatever stupid number is. They just don't understand how difficult that actually is or how unrealistic that sort of mentality is towards it.
The great example, I think it's a great example. Someone might tell me otherwise, but I think the great example of that particular predicament you just described is that we heard the numbers that Sky Deutschland just got sold to RTL. And there was a number floating around that basically their acquisition for a subscriber was roughly the equivalent of around 2 years of subscription to get one subscriber. Yeah. Now, if people that have been doing it for decades have a huge audience and have a real inability to drive new subscribers to the platform, and then you look at sports, who is relatively inexperienced actually marketing product themselves, they are the channel. They're not the ones that are actually the ones typically doing the marketing. In general terms, there's no way that they could say and think that they could do it better than most of the major broadcasters and platforms that exist in market. It's just way more complicated, and we've got way more case studies or examples with OTT that most have failed trying to do that with misaligned goals versus what's a realistic outcome for those platforms. So yeah, I think that's a great example of marketing is one of these things within all of this is how do you leverage that audience and leverage that platform to maximize the value of it. Sports is still learning how to do all that, and they're a long way from knowing how to do that really effectively.
Well, like most things, we talk about nuance. There was some agreement in the comment section, but then there were also some disagreements in the comment section. And I think one of the key things came was, I think everyone agrees that YouTube needs to be a part of your strategy. I think to what degree, there's different layers of that, but I thought there were a couple of interesting examples where people talked about, we're not a tier 1 sport. We don't have that. But what YouTube allowed us to do was to collect data to then go out and find broadcast partners or to go sell to sponsors. And that's the kind of thing, if you have no access to linear, or even if you can build an OTT platform, you just don't have the reach or the scale to drive people to your niche platform. YouTube gives you the opportunity for, Nick, what did we call it the other day? When you just walk into something where we created our own word. You remember we created our own word about people just stumbleability, I believe was the word.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where there's a couple people in the comment section, because of YouTube, we were able to prove our business case that we were worthy of sponsorship or we were worthy of a broadcast deal, which I think sometimes you got to walk before you can run. The idea of building an OTT platform might be great, but YouTube might at least validate that you have an audience for it, or, build out a sponsorship there. So I thought that was a really interesting comment that came from people about how YouTube can be used in that way.
Yeah. Someone who commented there, which was previously, and he's actually spoken to us as well. I'm not sure on the pod, but definitely with the Sports Pro team. And he's a really good person to be listening to and following with his insight around how a club or a team or maybe a league is trying to enable this type of activity, and is good at also bringing it back down, like calming people down a little bit about the excitement. But But his point was that the analytics available on YouTube are really first class in comparison to perhaps some other platforms, whether it be your own direct-to-consumer or whether it be other social media platforms out there. And I've looked at them and I completely agree with that. I think that is the special sauce that YouTube does. They give you really a full spectrum of access into the insights of how all your content is performing. Whereas I've seen some subscription platforms, including ones that we have, that I am still, after a couple of years, banging the drum for more insight into how our content's performing. And whereas that's all there on a platter. So I think particularly for anyone who's in this early stage, it is, like to your point, a great set of validation. I think the tricky bit that comes on that part, though, is what we talked about before. Again, we're going to say it again, but that entertainment versus sports part. Right? Because if the most successful content on YouTube is the non-sports part of their content, then is actually validation of your sport or your thesis on what a good sport properly looks like, or is it just that the thesis you can create great content and doesn't need to be that sport, it could be something else that would make you successful. I think that's the tricky bit there, which we can talk a bit more about in some stats in a second. But does that really prove anything out on ultimately the possible success you might have with that property? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll read because I got the stats in front of me now, and shout out to Paola Marinoni. Believe you've appeared on her podcast before. She, ex Google, ex YouTube, great follow, puts out a ton of information, ton of data, and I'd be lying to you if I told you I hadn't looked at multiple of her posts to find a little inspiration on this. But to your point, she was talking about, is entertainment a friend or foe of sport? And she did some research basically looking at the top most 8 watched long form videos of all time on the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and NHL channels to figure out, in terms of long form, what are people tuning in for? Sports or entertainment? 8 out of 8 for the NFL and Major League Baseball were entertainment, not sports related. For the NBA, it was 6 out of 8. And then I'm not great at math, but looking at the NHL, that must be 5 out of 8. I think I can figure out if it's 62.5, it must be 5 out of 8. But the point being is, if you kind of look at all those, I'd probably say about 7 out of 8 of the most long form watch videos are entertainment. And it just goes to show sort of that YouTube strategy in terms of, how do you balance that out? And I thought that was a really interesting statistic that she was able to dig out there.
Yeah, completely. I think it definitely got me thinking. And now there's some tricky aspects to that, right? So those major properties don't have any premium rights on those platforms. They would have all of theirs wrapped up in other deals. However, they do publish a lot of highlights related content on those platforms, and they aren't showing at the top end. Now, again, you could find some logic to that. My speculation would be that, yes, the NFL publishes highlights, but it publishes highlights on every single game, and it publishes multiple lengths of every single game. So the saturation of highlights, therefore, would be only servicing certain groups, whereas entertainment is effectively servicing everyone, potentially, depending on the type of content it actually is. So maybe just that entertainment-related content just has a much more broader appeal for people that are consuming it, whereas the highlights and the sports-specific stuff might be servicing specific fan groups and fan sets more so. Does that make sense? So like you as a Bengals fan, you want to watch more Bengals highlights, but if something happens that, I don't know what one of the top examples was, but I know something happening at the Super Bowl that was funny or random, that's really relevant or interesting to everyone. So I think it's that nuance there that can shift the needle different ways if you took it below that top tier with their rights spread across other markets or other platforms. Would that look the same way? I think it would actually, but it's something to think about. I think is that complexity of highlights versus non-live, and YouTube being a platform that, to your point, is not. Is it a sports platform? Is it a platform of sports consumption, or is it just a platform where people consume stuff and you're there? And that's the tricky predicament, I think, with YouTube.
Well, I think we can dive into one of the case studies and, again, pulled up some numbers. Paula listed them out, so giving credit where credit's due. She's saving me the work of having to go out and do it. But one of the examples she pulled out a couple months back was the PGA Tour, and just some figures from back when that was in May. So some of these numbers, they'll have likely gone up. But, as of about 6 weeks ago, they had 1.6 million subscribers on their YouTube channel. They had 1.9 billion lifetime views, and they had posted 21.3 thousand videos. So just give you an idea of the scale of what's on there. Now, I think just for some context, to give you a bit of an idea, because we're talking about entertainment, and we already mentioned Grant Horvat earlier. The PGA Tour has 1.6 million followers, but Bryson DeChambeau has 2 million followers. Good Golf has 1.8 million followers, and Grant's just behind them with 1.4 million followers. So you're seeing this golf ecosystem of the creator content. One of the other stats that was really interesting, Paul pulled out, was in a 30-day period within May, they had amassed 15.2 million views from shorts, which represented 54% of the channel's total content, which I find really interesting because I'm on TikTok. I don't actually consume YouTube Shorts, although that's sort of their apples to apples product. But I do think it is interesting to see how much of their content is consumed in that fashion. And then the other part about YouTube is about the PGA Tour we talk about, is they have put in an effort to tap into the creator economy, which I think you can see from what they're doing with some of the comparable channels. In 2024, they launched their Creator Classic, which was to get, it was a different model, right? Using YouTube, ESPN Plus, Peacock to get content creators golfing. And I think this last year, they've started getting people like Marquise Brownlee, the tech YouTube influencer, involved. They've also got a creator council that, what I read in reports, meets once a month with a whole strategy around, finding Gen Z. And I think golf is really interesting, Nick, because you're talking about who should and who shouldn't go YouTube or where you should prioritize it. And we know golf skews a little bit older, so you don't necessarily want to leave that linear audience. But at the same time, you're saying, is that necessary long-term strategy? The sustainable, probably not. So you need to also put things into YouTube. And I do find the PGA Tour to be really interesting this way that they still have their traditional models via Sky, ESPN, their traditional partners, but they have made a really concerted effort about what they do digitally. And I think you are starting to see some of the benefits of what they've done. Some of that's not directly their channels. It's the creator economy around that, but it also feels like they've embraced that creator economy and they've not tried to. I know we talked the other week about not letting Grant film on the tour, but there are some places we can't go too far. But it seems like they're doing a really good job of balancing those two approaches.
Well, the numbers certainly show that. And I think they have been, from my experience consuming their content, they've been really good at using highlights in different types of ways that are really interesting to watch, and going back into the archive probably as well as anyone to show cool shots and cool experiences happening. And that stuff is really good to watch. I find it interesting, and I'm not a massive golfer, although I've got pictures of Woods and Greg Norman behind me. I'm more aspirational than aspirational golfer at the moment. But my point is they have done a really good job with the construct that they've got. Now, I'm going to contradict it a little bit. I would say that this might be controversial, but in many ways, I do believe that with Liv coming to the game, it really upset the apple cart in a lot of ways. And one of the reasons that upset things was Liv's golf was very different, much more open on access. And we've seen what happened as a result of that with Bryson doing his channels, that Phil Mickelson's doing his stuff now. And that accessibility, that more relaxed nature, even small things, but like them allowing golf players to wear shorts on tour. Like, how mad is it that PGA Tour players can't wear shorts no matter what the temperature is? But that was a rule. And all these things they started to do, I think, forced the PGA Tour to innovate in a lot of ways. They had, I think it was pre-Liv, they had, do you remember that? There was like an index, basically like a popularity index. It was like player
Yeah,
impact.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, there's some sort of bonus scheme at the end of this tour. Yeah, I forget what it was called, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
That was an interesting approach. That I have no idea if that still exists or not, but basically is like a bonus for those that are getting visibility and marketable. They get like a top up basically of earnings on top of what they would earn on the tour, which I thought was an interesting move. I'm not sure if it was it worked out well and made everyone happy, but for those at the top end, giving the most visibility to the sport, I think it makes a load of sense. And so I do think some of they've had to innovate by need to stay relevant, to keep growing audiences through those digital channels. And I do think innately now, people will talk about golf as an older person's sport, older demographic, but all the content I see, maybe because I'm a young buck is quite young, younger demographics that are playing, it doesn't feel like it's trying to service the older demographics in that content. So maybe it's a small sample size. Maybe I'm consuming stuff that is targeted at younger generations that happens to hit me. But my point is that it does feel like the flexibility and this approach by both PGA Tour and Live Golf and its players has helped skew that audience much younger. And anecdotally, when I have been to the range here and in Sweden, and there's a short golf course nearby, I only see young people playing. Only. Like it's incredible how young it skews there. So maybe that investment by the PGA Tour and all those other channels that I mentioned has led to it getting younger and interest and popularity. And weird quirk in Sweden, really weird quirk. You know how like baseball caps are big, right? Like, you know, everywhere you go, like everyone's got a Dodgers or a Yankees cap or some sort of variation of that. Golf caps are massive here, like all brands. Well, not just like MLB, like I'm talking Titleist, Ping, tailor-made. Yeah. Kids going to school now. Maybe I'm living in too posh an area. Maybe that might be part of it. But I do see it all the time. And I was like, what? Is that cool? I feel like I've just now aged myself exponentially by like judging teenagers and what they wear. But it's a weird quirk I never thought I'd ever see, is that golf clothing is cool.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, pivoting back, Nick, one of the comments that did come up on that first YouTube post that we've sort of talked about here, that I wouldn't say, you know, the kids sometimes calling it clapping back, is some of the things when someone says something, you clap back at them. You know, someone talked about ownership, and their criticism is when you post your content on YouTube, you therefore basically are giving up ownership of your content. And, you know, not to put words in their mouth, the way I interpreted was that's a negative, that you shouldn't be giving up your ownership because in the long term, it's not sustainable. It's not maximizing value. And then you went and created another post sort of elaborating on, you know, what is the importance of owning your data? And, you know, there was a YouTube sort of tinted perspective on that. But again, lots of people commenting on sort of how valuable is that data? How valuable is ownership? But maybe for those that haven't seen the LinkedIn post, just giving them a little bit more of a flavor, kind of what you were getting across on that one.
Yeah, I've heard this quite a lot over the years. And now I think where we're at now with all these other platforms, I think this conversation about owning versus, renting an audience is quite frankly a bit naive, a bit misplaced, which might be a bit harsh to some, but to say you own an audience is, you know, unless you own an active paying subscriber base, I don't think you can even remotely suggest you own anything. You don't own their time and attention. Your access to that audience is only as good as your content. And if you get them coming back, just because you've got them to subscribe on like YouTube doesn't mean they're ever going to come back again. In fact, the people that subscribe to various channels that exist out there, if you don't engage with a couple of pieces of content, you won't even get served that again until you engage with it again. Like you will just be off the spectrum there. So that's on YouTube. But if you are owning a platform, let's say you own an OTT product, and you have their first party data because they've signed up to the platform, they may never come back to you again. So what do you own? You own 100% of nothing there. You own some data points. Like whoop-de-doo, if they're not consuming the content, you don't own their time or anything else with it. So I just think the idea of like owning audience versus not owning it is very misaligned, because it's ultimately the consumer is the one that owns that time and that time and attention. And all you're doing is doing whatever you can to get their attention and then get the maximum value out of that attention. And it doesn't really matter if you own it or rent it. And that's, I think, that's a fundamental thing that you do. You'll hear a lot of people say, well, first party data is everything, blah, 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 blah. And look, I do think first party data is really important, a bit like you talked about with the YouTube point about the access to data and insight about who your audience is, gives you all sorts of levers you can pull to sell and monetize that audience if you know who they are in a deeper way. You can't call it owning your audience. I don't think you can ever put it that way. I just don't think that really works in any example that I can think of that you can legitimize it in that sense.
Yeah, and there are a few comments I found interesting. One of them was Jason Steele commenting basically the idea of driving people to your owned and operated app, it's a complete 180 on consumer behavior. You know, people are going to YouTube naturally. They're going to TikTok naturally. The idea of trying to drive them to another platform, while we can sit here as a business and say why that's really valuable to have that person come onto our platform, you're really trying to change the behaviors that exist these days. And you're constantly swimming against the current. And is the cost of marketing people to go to that platform, the cost of building that platform, going to be outweighed by the benefit you get from finally succeeding and driving them there? Because the only people, I don't want to say only, but the majority of the people that want to go there, they're the hardcores. Like, you probably weren't going to have trouble capturing them to begin with. You probably already know that person because they're buying jerseys on your e-commerce platform or something. You probably already know those individuals, but how many people are you capturing outside of that aren't going through that stream? And I thought that was a very pragmatic way to think about that.
Yeah, completely. I think it's a harsh reality for a lot of people. Is your content really good enough to drive people to your own platform, to make it worthwhile to invest all that effort and resource in marketing and content creation, to create something different and special to drive people to your platform? Or is it just reskinning what's already like for like? Maybe you're not producing, but other people have similar stuff out there that you've got on your own platform actually exists in channels. It's something that we talk about and have to deal with in our business and at Sports Pro as well. We produce so much content. We have to be really ruthless with ourselves and talk about that. So it's like, okay, is this stuff going to bring people here and make them come back again and again? Or do we have to do more where they are? There's various studies and data I've seen over the years about how like app downloads are going down on smartphones and so forth. People just rely on the big social ones, and there's the utility apps that you need. So like, could be buying stuff, keeping track of your banking, all those essentials.
Shazam,
I must have
my all-time favorite app. I just love it. Just one use, perfect.
That's it, and that's great utility for that. But if you are trying to create a destination that people come back to, I think it'd be quite naive to think that if you build it, they will come, which is a line we've used many times over the years, and I think that's even more pertinent than ever these days. So I think that is a tricky balance. If you believe that you can create something that is really special and valuable enough to bring people to your platform, then do it. And then you need to just make sure that you've got the flow of audience coming to it to engage with, and hopefully you can turn that into real value. I'm not saying don't do that, but you've got to ask yourself the question in sports and media, is it actually that? Or is it actually stuff they can get already for free on those existing platforms that they're already on all the time? And that's tricky.
Yeah. And another really smart individual that we've had on the pod before, has been at our events. He commented on there, Yannick Ramke over at One Football, basically, don't own your audience, know your audience. And, it's still, there's all this argument, like, you could have first party data, but if you don't actually know the audience, does owning them actually really matter? And, you sort of put, true D2C still remains a myth. And I think that goes back to your point. It is a bit of a harsh reality. Like, you may have first party data, but like, if you're not doing anything with it, or you don't have the ability to do anything with it, like, does it really matter? Is it just a nice thing to say? Like, as difficult as that may sound.
Oh, it's so true though. Like, I've had stuff come up internally around like audience and data, and I'm basically saying to them, we have to be more focused on behavior than we have to be on what data, or who's someone has filled out a form before, or signed up to a newsletter. Because if they're not consuming the newsletter, then they're redundant to us. They're not someone who's actually interested and active with us. But those people that are behaving and consuming things actively, they're the ones we have to focus on. What are those behaviors that are needle moving that we can then offer more value to? And that I think is a growing trend the industry needs to be much more focused on. So I think ultimately it comes back to, like, the conclusion here is always, it's a balance. I think you need a first party place so you can get some audience. You need to do the YouTube bit so you can get some audience data. Then you can marry and compare those up and see how aligned those are. And maybe you might see that one skews way one way or the other. Like, maybe there's some things you can learn from that. But it is a risky game to say that, YouTube's not worth doing because you don't own the audience, someone else is owning it. Because will you ever own them?
I don't know. They're fickle creatures, Nick.
If you start paying them, I'll tell you what. If you start paying them to come to your platform, that's there's been speculated for a while. Is that the data is so important. Imagine if media platforms started paying them to be on the platform. That would be a whole other ballgame. But let's not open up that can of worms, Chris.
No, not today. Now, there's lots of examples, different people that are doing different things. we've historically talked about the NBA, sort of when they initially opened up the floodgates, where there was an opportunity to put up the walls to say, no, you can't have access. NBA were one of the first people to sort of knock down the walls and say, hey, we'll figure out ways to work with content creators to use our highlights because we know it's really good for us. We've seen people like Disruptor Leagues, Kings League coming in, Baller League coming in, doing different things. And mostly, although Ballers League has a bit of a Sky Sports thing, largely doing things via YouTube and Twitch. We've talked about Casa TV in Brazil and what they're doing from a content creator perspective. And there's different angles of which we can go talking about different things. But one of the other interesting bits that came up, Paula did, again, just reference her, she has I think it was a 64 slide breakdown of YouTube channels across, the major football leagues and looking at individual teams. And some of the interesting things that come up, sort of causation versus correlation, how many videos are people producing versus how many views are they getting per creation. And there were some interesting statistics in there and sort of comparing and contrasting the two, sort of which leagues are doing better than the rest. And, Nick, I don't know, particularly for you, if there's anything that came out from their particular teams, leagues, or little nuggets of information just about sort of those YouTube stats.
Well, I think we've mentioned Paula so many times now that, hopefully she sees that as some solid plugging. But also we probably have to get her on at some stage and get her to give us a little bit of a deep dive on it. No, it was an interesting read. It was basically, I think she did in partnership with the SFS event that exists in Italy. And the typical top clubs were at the top end of the bulk of the relevant stats. There was a few interesting ones. I'd like to focus on, let's say, the random ones, the surprise packets, rather than the ones that you obviously expect Real Madrid and Barcelona to be at like the top of the La Liga, right? That's not too surprising. There's a couple of ones that I took away that I thought might be worth rattling off. I thought firstly one was interesting, that was Atletico Madrid, who actually secured more subscribers last year than all of the others, including Barcelona and Real Madrid, which I didn't think that was really achievable. Now, it looks like from the data, very top level, but they have really only started heavily on YouTube last year, which is probably why they grew so quickly versus the others. But still, the size of audience that they're competing against with Barcelona and Real Madrid did really make me think that they would struggle to ever be able to compete with them on a year perspective. And the other one that was quite surprising, just that Sevilla pumps up the most content. So I don't know what's on that platform, but the fact that they're publishing that much, they're only they're not even in the top 5, I think, of actual content ranking. Is something, just again a reminder of perhaps more is not always better. From Serie A's perspective, it was super interesting, actually, who was the lead content producer there. Was Udinese was producing double what any other single club was producing, which is extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting because we've spoken to Mike Armstrong, who's no longer at Juventus, but we know he built up a huge content team there. We know AC Milan, with the American investment they built their own recording studios. And, I've gotten to speak to some of the AC Milan folks. They're regulars at our Madrid event. I'm sure we'll see them again this year. There's a couple teams in Serie A that have put massive investment into creator networks, content networks. So I agree with you. That is an interesting stat, given what I know some of the other teams are investing in that place.
Yeah, super interesting to see them there. I mean, there was a clear delineation between the top 5 clubs in Serie A and everyone else. But then you've got randomly Udinese popping up with producing more uploads than anyone else. Yet they're only 11th in views in all time, which is not surprising. Random fact, but Verona generates the most views per subscriber, which I don't know, just a bit random. I don't even know where Verona is, but there you go. And with 3 of the big 5 clubs in Serie A doing the worst or the least. Again, I think that's a victim of when you've been around for a long time, you've got a lot of subscribers, it's difficult to get engagement, perhaps new sets of subscribers to keep those numbers up. But nevertheless, see 3 of the 5. When I compared that to other leagues, the numbers weren't as bottom end. What I mean by that is that the top end wasn't as low on the views per video front. Quickly, I'll go through a couple more. The Premier League, just basically, I've heard Liverpool talked about a lot as the leaders on YouTube, and they are absolutely crushing in pretty much almost every category. Man City was also up there, which is no real surprise. I think Brighton and there was another one was right up there on like a views per video front.
Yeah.
I did see Fulham, I'd say my old club. I haven't really followed them too closely over the years since I've moved out away from that area. Was pretty average and mediocre across all levels of measure. And the final one I thought was really interesting was the MLS. Inter Miami was leading the way. Like, not surprising. They have Messi. They have a bunch of other incredible players there. No shock there. But what was really random was that Minnesota United FC, which I'd never even heard of before, was
a relatively new franchise.
Yeah, well, they're number 2 when it comes to generating new subscribers. Now, they are relatively new by the sounds of it, which is ideal, and that probably helps. But still, the rate of growth you would expect from some of the bigger clubs, I thought would still beat someone like Minnesota United FC. So, I don't know, just shout out to some of those small organizations doing what they can to fight with the big guys. It shows it's not always the big ones that are doing the most out there. There are some leagues and teams that are still punching above their weight.
Yeah, well, what I think is interesting is we'll come back to what I'm going to focus on is quality versus quantity. Because we talked about on YouTube, the way the algorithm works. If your content's not good, you'll find out real quick. At the same time, what does seem to be consistent is all the organizations that are doing well on YouTube, it's not a passive play. You know, we talked about PGA Tour's got 21,000 videos. There was some other data that I looked into about how many videos the NBA has. You know, we're talking tens of thousands. We talk about these clubs that were surprised by them being successful. It's also because they are still producing a pretty high quantity of content as well. You know, I don't think as optimistic as we are about YouTube that we're saying just plug and play, you do it and you're going to have success. You still actually need to have an active strategy to be publishing multiple times. So I do think that is one takeaway. Where the balance between quality and quantity matches up, I'm not sure, but it definitely feels like there's a minimum threshold with which your quantity must hit to be able to be discoverable and to go through there. No one on here is producing one video a week and having success. It is something they are actively pushing out content.
Yeah. And the other word really is iteration, Chris. Like I bang this drum a lot here as well at Sports Pros. Like, we have to keep iterating stuff because, quite frankly, if you keep publishing the same stuff, you need to be consistent with the amount of content you are publishing if you want to create visibility and get a follower base. But if you keep publishing crap, also you won't get very far, right? So you need to make sure you keep iterating and making it better and better. And that's where the tools of YouTube are so strong that you can really see where people are dropping off, where they're coming from, what content isn't working and is, and what content sits on the fence. So we have some stuff that goes out, and one video might do well, another one might do terrible, and I can't really tell you what the difference is and why, but sometimes it could be algorithm related and that's it, right? So I think you've got to get a good sample size of content and be able to make some decisions and keep iterating all the way through, and not just expecting everything to work magically just because you're a football club in a major league.
Absolutely. And there's still so many other topics we can talk about. There's still some case studies we want to personally talk about, and we will do in later episodes. And like I said, maybe we need to call Paul up after how much for stuff we've gone through with on the next time we talk about YouTube. But I do appreciate everybody tuning in. Like I said, go find those LinkedIn posts of Nick's if you want to see some of the comments. They're averaging about 30 comments, lots of people, lots of opinions, lots of interesting stuff there. But do appreciate you joining us for this episode of StreamTime Sports.
Yeah, tell us what you think as well. Reach out to us through our requisite social channels, whether it be on those posts that Chris mentioned, or just reach out to us through DMs or email if you want to, and let us know what you think and join the conversation. But thanks everyone for joining.